I want to give her just a little bit more space on this side. Erase this really quick. Can you guys see all those lines? Or are they too light? Okay. And because her head is like so high up, right, she's gonna have like this axis. So I want to like just make a ball and let myself like kind of remember that, hey, you don't want that head to kind of come down from this point. So just like I would if I was doing any other drawing, right, I'm gonna just kind of like start the same way. So I'm gonna spend, when I'm doing a longer pose, I definitely spend a little bit more time like setting up the structure for the head so that everything else is kind of bound to that shape, right? So her jawline is going to be facing up. These are like just quick notes I'm making. So I know that I'm going to be looking at the top of her jaw, right? Her eye line is going to be like right around here. Right? I'm getting really close to the top of the page, and I don't want to get any closer than that. So that's kind of like, that's like my marker right there, okay? And then I'm going to draw through the shoulders. And the shoulder over here is coming down. I could even like lay in just a little note for her hair and say, hey, her hair is going to be coming right over here. And I can use that as a way to kind of like break down my shapes. Her shoulder line is coming out like this. And I'm just going to draw right through her torso. I don't want to draw really complicated shapes at this stage, right? I'm thinking first in terms of silhouette. So I'm using these shapes to distinguish like my width and my length, but I'm not trying to get into anatomy at this point. Because if I do, all right, I'm going to start drawing like little bumps and curves. I'm going to be like, oh, there's a curve right there and a bump right there and another bump right here. And those lines are going to kind of throw me into like a proportion loop where all my proportions are going to get kind of like wackadoodle. Okay, so I always want to make sure I'm focusing on shapes. Shoulders coming out. Okay. I will throw in like basic construction lines, like say, okay, well, this is the center of her torso. I can say, hey, this is like pelvis. So I can start with my center. Did I say pelvis? I meant sternum. I can start with my center line. And just kind of, your arm is coming down like this. So I'm just building out my shapes really slowly. Okay. And I know that if I wanted to, right, I can do what Joe taught me way back in the day, and I can actually lay in my pelvis, which I should always do. Okay, here's her rib cage, just for kind of like reminder's sake. Okay. Leg is going to come out of here. Okay. It's going to come, if I was to draw her arm out, her leg kind of extends right beneath her arm. So that kneecap is going to be like right there. So I use these little markers as a way to kind of like tell me where things are in relationship to each other. And I think the biggest gap between like a student and like an artist who's maybe been working for a little bit longer, I don't really consider myself a professional by any means, but like is the ability to kind of look at everything simultaneously, whereas a student will just kind of like focus on one area, right? I'm kind of like using everything I see as a way to kind of gauge my shape. So I can really quickly change things. I have no problem like admitting, like, hey, that's wrong, fix that. And that way it can kind of build a better drawing. I'm also holding the pencil really loose at this stage. I don't want to be like bound to anything. It's like the beginning of a new relationship. Hey, I'm just testing this out. I don't know if it's gonna work. No, you like that? I thought that was a good one. No? And then I'll, right, you do. And then I'll commit later. All right, so legs coming out like that. Like that. All right, so now I have like a basic structure down. I'm going to come in and I will start to like make really intentional lines, really committed lines. Okay, I'm going to come in into her head, and I'm going to start to think about like shapes. I'm going to draw through all my planes. Draw through the plane at the forehead. Draw through that center line simultaneously. And here's her jaw. I'm going to make her head a little bit larger. This is probably going to change my whole drawing. That's okay. The reason I want to make it a little bit larger is because I see like a lot of negative space down here, and I want to just kind of adjust things a little bit. And then the mask on the face is going to be pretty high up, right? It follows her eyeline really, really closely. Her hairline, not eyeline. Lay on the jaw. And I want her jaw to kind of like go in that direction. And so it's a little bit closer for me to the size that I want to get to. Yeah, so I'm going to drop this shoulder. Now all that work that I did is going to be destroyed, but that's okay. Come down that center line. Draw right through her torso one more time. If anyone has any questions about what I'm doing, just shout out. I'm happy to answer. And you can see, like, I definitely have a habit of using straighter lines, and I've talked to you guys about this before, but it just helps me to kind of like build my measurements with a lot more accuracy for me. And I can kind of like gauge and see how things map out a little bit better. Here's her hair. So it's going to go down. Okay, arm's going to come out. And there's going to be the joint of that arm. And I want to kind of like draw right around and find where the other arm is going to lie because they are related. There's that joint. And then that space between them is going to be right here. That forearm is going to come out. It's going to be a little bit foreshortened. That wrist is going to come out and up and over. And I'm just going to make like a little note, like hand is going to be like somewhere right here. Okay. Makes sense so far? That's good. This arm's got that center line that comes down it. Just want to link it to that leg. Now I'm going to come back here and I'm going to connect the rear of that torso. All the way down to the pelvis. That leg is going to come up, over, out. And anytime I'm drawing like a foreshortened view, I've drawn this for some of you guys, but I always lay in my ellipse first. And that's really, really important because I want to kind of like imagine that I'm drawing through the form. It's kind of why we start with blocking in the shapes because we're helping ourselves to understand how something can actually shift in perspective based on how we see through it, right? And then I can come back in and cut through the back of the form. So I'm not like overextending myself. I always want to draw that center line coming down the tibia. Right now I can use like anatomical words and you guys will understand me. Okay, I can draw like a really, really simple structure and then build out the other side of the cap if I want to. Okay. Then her foot's gonna hook around. Right? We can kind of get into the nitty gritty or how we see that shape. It's gonna be really foreshortened. It's gonna come towards me. Remember, the top of that foot is almost like a flat. Right? So her foot's gonna be like right around here. And anytime I have like a foreshortened foot, it's always good to like put a toe in because it kind of helps to like establish the direction of where the feet are like facing. Okay? Toenail is what I meant to say. Not the toe. Okay. All right, and then that other leg is going to come out. All right, and it's going to be somewhere around here. I'm just going to lay it in really fast, just so we have like that basic shape. Okay, so that would be like step one. Right. Break apart my proportions. Right. Set apart my line work and keep it as clean as I can. Right. So you'll notice like I hold my hand really, really far out because I don't want to make like really impactful lines that I can't erase. Like a lot of students, you're kind of like pushing really hard. It's a lot harder for me to erase something like this and make a change than it is for me to hold it really, really light and then pull off that line. See, the value difference is actually a really important factor when I'm drawing in a finished product. Okay. All right. So since I have this down, I want to start to go in and I want to start to think about anatomy at this stage. And this is when I'll come in and I'll look at like big shapes. And I don't want to get like overdrawing into my pose, but I do want to fix like major landmark issues. So like if she has her deltoid, for instance, right, is a really strong muscle. So I want to make sure that it is showing those forms out really clear. So I'll come in and I'll start building on top of these shapes as a way to kind of like satisfy the need to see form. Okay. She has like a really specific value shape. So I'll start to map out some of these values. I'm going to see like very, very subtle like shifts in the pectoralis major. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to start to break apart those really subtle changes that we see. Okay. I'll group shadow shapes together because if I can group them together and they start reading, that means I'm going to make my drawing much more clear and visible to the viewer. Come in, pull out her forearm, come down. And I'm thinking about that forearm as that whole ellipse 2x4 that we thought about. So here's my ellipse. I'm going to come over to the other side of it. There is my brachioradialis muscle. I want to indicate that. I'm going to come into her elbow. I'm going to build that edge that is going to come up and over and break apart into shadow. Okay. And then that elbow is going to start really, really hard and it's going to get really soft anatomically. Okay. So it's straight line, curved line. So as I'm kind of like walking you guys through my motivation, I want you to hear the language that I'm using. Because when I'm saying like soft curve, hard edge, soft edge, I'm thinking about bones versus muscle, right? I'm thinking about how to like describe the anatomy differently. Okay, come into her arm, not her arm, breast, right? Into the nipple line, and we're going to start grouping values together. There's no like specificity into the order of like how I want you guys to draw. If you want to start with the head, you can definitely start with the head. But what I do want you to see is how I build the drawing, much like I would my final project. Right? I'm going to go from big shapes and then start to articulate those shapes into more specific shapes. Right? Because if the big shapes are reading, that means that my smaller shapes are going to make more sense as well. Her leg comes out a little bit higher. And she's got like a stronger kneecap, comes down. I want to draw into the kneecap. Use my soft edge. Kneecap is going to come in. Into the ankle. Into the tibia. This foot is going to get a little bit bigger. Always messing with my proportions throughout the drawing. And then that base of the leg has a really, really strong shadow that's going to come out. The light is like really casting down upon it. And it's going to go up into the bicep femoris. Does everyone kind of see what I'm doing? It's not like, brain surgery by any means. Pretty straightforward once you start breaking it down, kind of just doing it in thought of it. Okay. This whole arm is in shadow, so the most important thing for me is this curved shadow shape. Why is the curved shadow shape important? You want to tell me? What is it describing? Circumference, right? So I want to make sure I'm like following that shape. And then there's a secondary shadow, just like right here, where the insertion of the arm is. Right? I'm going to come in and I'm going to reinforce that circumference by creating a really, really strong curve. And then building it into like a hard, straight line. Okay. Her hand is right here, bone. And then it's kind of sitting over that leg. Okay. Come into the secondary value. I can like build it out. And then I'll come in, I'm going to draw a really strong curve because that's a soft shape. And I can come in and reestablish how I want those shapes to read once they've kind of been broken down into really, really strong straight lines. The anatomy is reading, the anatomy will work. Straight worker. Here's her shoulder, hair, here. All right. Does that make sense so far to everybody? Okay, so step 2, like specify your values and your shapes. I should say using shapes. And then also pay attention to hard versus soft edges. We'll keep it into 2 categories today. And you can see what I mean by a hard edge. These hard edges are like these really, really hard lines. Soft edges are like when I use my edge of my pencil to create some of those categories, okay, of value. All right, I'm going to come up into her torso, into her head, sorry. I'm going to start drawing up into her shapes. I really shouldn't do that until I've laid everything in. So let's go back in and then make sure that we've laid things in. Okay. Orbit of her eye, comes right here. Okay. And we'll come back. You sure?
Yeah.
Not like one. Okay. Yeah. I'm just going to really quickly just kind of like make some marks. All right, we'll come back and we'll finish that. All right, thanks. So that's step 1. Okay. Do you guys want to draw or do you want to wait, give her a little break, and we'll come back and finish it? Okay. The next step isn't going to take me long. Let me pause this. Why don't you guys take a 5-minute break? I'm going to go check on the people in the other room and we'll come back. Okay, so I think this is the part that scares everyone, especially Amanda. And this is where like I'll slow down and be really specific with my shapes. And when we talk about this in the other class, like I actually talk about the whole image. I talk about like the value in the background, the value in the foreground, but we're not going to really discuss that. Then we really talk about composition. All I want to do is focus on how do I build a figure and make it feel cohesive. And how do I think about that cohesiveness when I'm actually drawing through the forms, okay? So, it looks good. Yeah, you're right. So I'm gonna actually probably redraw the head because I want to spend a little bit of time with it because I think that's the biggest struggle for most people. So let's start there. So I'm going to come up. I'm going to redraw the volume. I'm going to make sure that everything is right. And this is like anytime I'm doing like a multiple stage pose, multiple like set pose, I do not ever just go in and start like filling things in. I always recheck my drawing because the models are human. They're going to shift a little bit, and my decisions shift a little bit as well, right? They're not always consistent by any means. Sometimes it'll give me like that little break is actually a good thing because it gives you the ability to see where you screwed up. And I immediately saw that like I had drawn the face wrong. I'm using the wrong pencil. The pencil's like good. So her jaw comes in a little bit more. And her hair, right about there again. I'm going to come in, and first thing I should have done is really like kind of focused on that center line. And then the big thing that I always want to do is really establish where the jaw is in relationship to everything. Why is the jaw so important? Anybody have any thoughts? Perspective? It's supporting everything else. I want to make sure that it's like in the right spot. It's connecting the dots with her ear, the line of action for her sternocleidomastoid, which is coming down right there. It kind of sets the stage for where her neckline is going to be. So all that is related. So I want to make sure that I'm always thinking about all those forms of relationship to each other. Her ear is going to be much in the same spot, so that's a good thing. Right, and then I can look at the value relationships a little bit later, but there's like one major one right here. I'm going to come through and draw through the mask one more time. I'm going to shift it a little bit. So here's when I went awry. Everything actually is facing this way. But I drew them. So her nose is coming down, the mouth is coming down. So I actually shifted the angle of everything. So we come in. And I always want to start from the top of the form. Her head is going to come down like that. In and break apart that value relationship into her brow line. And draw right through the brow line. Brow line is a specific distance from the hair. So I use the hair as a kind of a way to mark off where the brow line is going to be. And into the nose. Find that angle. Top of the nose, base of the nose, arc of the nose. It's a little bit more foreshortened. So correct it. It comes out a little bit more. You guys hear about the flaming Disneyland Maleficent dragon? The dragon caught on fire during during yesterday's performance and burned down to the ground, but no one got hurt.
Is it on YouTube?
It's all over the place. Yeah, and they're like, Disney's on fire. The people that were there were like, that was so cool. Because it actually caught on fire. It didn't seem like that. Yeah. So if I'm drawing this small, I usually like to have like a really, really sharp tool because it's really hard for me to get in here. So I'm going to shift pencils to this very sharp. I've drawn Cherry enough times where like if I don't feel like I'm drawing in a while, I feel like a failure. So I don't want to fail. Cherry's gonna hate me. eye socket, and then I can kind of like group in these values. Right, her nose. So let's do that a little bit more. Material had a little bit too small for my liking, but that's okay to manage. Draw it through the center. Lips are going to be a little bit higher. Isn't that controlling? Always kind of like line up my lips, make a point. Lips right here, and then go back in space. Just going to group those shapes together. Give it that shadow. It's going to go into the shadow. Okay. Top of the image is so pretty hard. Down. Okay. So that's about the level of information I want. Right, her lips are coming out at an angle like that because I want that angle to be consistent with that axis and form. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. All right. I will make the shadows orange so you can see them. There's two big things that I want to kind of talk about, and then we'll be done. I'll let you guys draw. And this is like on repeat. If I have a form that is wide like this, right? I want to make sure that my pencil is almost flat to the page, right? And I'm using the big cone that sits at the end of my pencil, not my tip, right? And I want to draw flat, consistent value relationships that move in the direction of the form, right? If my form is long, like an arm, right, the tendency is I want to actually feel like I'm physically rotating my hand and the board. And you'll see me even rotate the board sometimes in longer poses and move in the direction of the page. If I am doing this, right, or this, you will see that this like action kind of disrupts the types of forms that you're actually trying to describe. So you want to try and minimize that. And it becomes really, really easy just to kind of like think about that as like a tool to lay in all your values. So because her form is long, most of these structures are going to be going in the same direction. I just want to draw directly down the shadow shapes. And I want to think about how they get grouped together. Right? So all these shadows are grouped together, grouped together, grouped together, right? Grouped together. And I'm only using like a one value system. I don't want to get too complicated. I'm going to let all my line work kind of show through my value because it's going to help me distinguish my forms. You can see if I spend all that time building all those value relationships, I forgot that one in the ear. Laying in the actual values themselves does not take a long time at all. So the arm shifts direction over here. There's a little bit of a shadow shape right here. The arm kind of like gets into a little bit of a shadow right there. And this arm is a little bit of a shadow right here. Yeah. You can see me move it up and down. I would not move up and down. I would actually move side to side. And then up and down. Okay. This is why I spend so much time just mapping out these edges, right? Because these edge shapes, these core shadows are what are really going to hold the forms for me. And that's what's going to tell me the rest of the story, right? It's probably important for me to like indicate what she's sitting on. So at some point in time, like I would throw in like some shadow shapes, you know, of some forms, make sure that the legs are in there for the stools, just so I have some relationship and context for the weight that's being distributed on the form. So if you do have time, think about your props, think about how they interact with the figure. And then all this is the other leg.